Welcome everybody to ESGX, the place where you can be informed, inspired, and take action. On today's ESGX, we have Nigel Cumberland and Veronica Monroe, moderated by myself, Paul Herman, and Nigel Lake in New York. Thank you for joining us. Please remember that you can ask questions in the chat or questions box. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. We're delighted to have you here with us today. In addition, we always simulcast to YouTube, so feel free to share that with your friends, family, colleagues, as well as decision makers and policymakers. The topic for today is the future of work, with an emphasis on how to collaborate during crisis. And I'd love to answer this question today: can humans and robots collaborate? So we'll try and dig into that. Nick, are you able to run the PowerPoint? Nigel, what's on tap for us today?
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And I don't quite have my usual inclusive background today, with a few technology glitches somewhere along the way. But the question you posed about, can robots make life better for humans and vice versa, is probably the most important question of all of this. We've certainly seen in things like chess that a computer can beat people, but there's nothing better than people working with computers to be even better using the AI. I'm just going to give a very quick overview of some of the background to all of this, and Nick's going to just jump through the first set of slides to, and just keep going for a few. It's about 4 or 5 in. But the point is the history of all of this, which is, we are dealing with a crisis where the healthcare crisis is what we're facing right up front, but the march of robotization has been dramatically accelerated by all of this. And there's we'll all have seen the media coverages on this slide along the way. And the challenge that we face is that the effects of robotization and AI are being accelerated by all of this. And if we just reflect very briefly on what has happened over time, once upon a time, everybody worked in farming, producing food. And a couple of slides forward, Nick, there's a kind of image which shows the 4 great revolutions. And now about 2 or 3% of the people are required to farm the food. And people have moved on, first of all, into manufacturing things, and then into clerical work, administrative work, and the tertiary economy. And if you just keep jumping forward a couple more, Nick, and then we'll be synced up. So this is the slide that shows the 4 great revolutions. And if we just jump forward one more slide here, then of course, one of the things which makes all this incredibly stressful is that new technologies are coming at us harder and faster. And this chart just shows how quickly new technologies get taken up. And the steeper the line, the faster this has happened. Now, there are a few on the way through in earlier years, which came very quickly, but over on the right, you can see that the lines are very, very steep. So if you are feeling stressed because of the COVID crisis and stressed because of the extent and speed of technological change, you're not going mad. This is the real world in which we are all living. Now, if we jump forward one more, please, Nick. It's really helpful to understand what is really going on here, and to split what we normally think of as the tertiary sector, which is management, administrative, and clerical roles, from a separate quaternary sector, which is everything which has in it or embedded in it a caring or human element. And what will happen is almost all the jobs in the tertiary, administrative, clerical, management world will be consumed by robots, and everything that is left will be in the quaternary sector, which is caring, creative, cultural, communications type roles, including sales. And if we just stay on this slide for a moment, Nick, this is then a real summary of where are we today. The COVID crisis itself has impacted every area of retail, including hospitality and travel and all of those. It's heavily impacted almost anything to do with the property sector, including office and retail property, etc., and of course impacted almost all the people. There is good news in that there are clearly growth sectors in the future as well. There is everything around healthcare, there is everything around food and hospitality, etc. This will come back when we escape from the lockdown. There's everything around AI. But how this plays out is incredibly important. And if we sit back and do nothing and wait for the robots to choose what's going to happen, then this will not be good for people and the evidence of history. And we'll share a slide on this in the agricultural revolution in the UK, again, the industrial revolution there, and we'll have all have seen this in the last 50 years in the US, is 50 years of almost no real wage growth. And we're just starting the next phase of this. So a positive mindset and active efforts to create a better society are incredibly important. And I think with that as the introduction, I will hand back to Paul to guide us into the discussion with Veronica and Nigel.
Thank you, Nigel. And as always, we'll have the slides available after the webinar. So Nigel shared some very insightful slides on innovation, as well as on the industrial revolutions. And these are part of Nigel's white papers on the future of work and society. Just want to point out to Nigel, I have my ESGX cup here. So if you're interested in also having an ESGX cup, we have merch on the ESGX site, as well as books written by the panelists on all ESGXs. So welcome, Nigel and Veronica. So Nick, if you get the prep slide ready, and Nigel and Veronica, if you turn on your video. I've also refer everybody to the chat box or the question box. So this is meant to be as interactive as possible. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, how you see the future of work, whether we can work with robots collaboratively. Veronica, do you want to kick it off and just give us a quick overview of your work? Like what is central to your work? Because you work around the world, across different industries, across different geographies. And then Nigel, you can do the same.
I work across the world with emerging markets and developed markets, and I work with mainly in the banking sector, but the oil and gas, as well as also working back in the UK with the Cabinet Office and politicians as well. So it's quite a widespread as well as UN people. I think the key thing here is they all have something in common, and they all have something in common with our audience here, which is what's next? What can we do? What's the next steps? And the concern for families, communities, etc. So we're going to have a look at that. Okay, thank you. Nigel.
Hi there, everybody, and it's great to be here. I'm a little similar to Veronica. I'm working with leaders all over the world, with multinationals, in banking, in technology, in manufacturing, and with the World Bank and a few of the United Nations bodies. Working with leaders, many of whom are excited about the future and some are very concerned. And at the moment with COVID-19 and the economic, for some, devastation, opportunities that are coming, it really throws them to think about robotics and AI as well, and technology perhaps speeding up. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. All right, Nick, you want to advance to the next slide? All right, so what shall we consider?
Paul, let's do the poll first of all, can we?
Yes. Okay, everybody, get ready on your screens. Nick's going to launch a poll. Nick Gower of Hip Investor, who's the brains and has technical expertise of ESGX here. Please click your answer to this question. How are you feeling about the future? Very hopeful, kind of worried, very worried. Oh no, it's the end of the world. So please click, fill that in. Very hopeful, kind of worried, very worried, end of the world. And Nick, let us know when you have enough votes and we can close the poll and see the results. Okay, poll's closed. Are we able to see the results? All right, so the good news is we have optimists on the line today. We have kind of hopeful. Half the people are kind of hopeful. 80% of the people are hopeful in some form. And there's a few of us who are kind of worried. Luckily, nobody thinks it's the end of the world. So Veronica, what should we think about these results?
Okay, well, I think it's great news, actually. If we can, Nick, if we can clear the poll, get that off the screen for a moment. It's very positive. And as you say, we've got some positive people who think positively with us, thankfully. And I just wanted to share these core beliefs that obviously some of our audience probably have, and they're based on hope. So what are the core beliefs? Because hope is the key here to cause us to have potent thinking that enables us to move into the future. So what we've got here is the first of all, one of them is the future will be better than the present. And that's because we are always setting goals for ourselves. We're always trying to make our future better. It's in our nature as human beings to set goals, okay? And 30% are very, very hopeful in the schools, which is just absolutely great. And the second one is, I have the power to make it so. Human beings are very resourceful. We want to make things happen. And having the belief that I have the power to make it so, we'll look at how you can do that a little bit later. You can be more confident, you can be more resourceful in your thinking and in your behaviors. The third one here is actually, there are many paths to my goals. I think we all know that, you know, when we set up in our careers, when we're kids, we think, I want to do this. And we think, well, I'll go to university, or I'll do this training, and then I'll move into this job, and then eventually I'll get into that job. But we know that we're never going to go there in a straight line. So it's to be really adaptable and flexible. And this is absolutely critical, particularly in the context of crisis, is to be creative around what are those various routes. And finally, the last one, real core belief, is none of them, these pathways, is free of obstacles. So it's about being realistic. So having hope, it's not like having a dream. It's about these core beliefs which help enable us to move forward. So that ignites the possibilities for us. So what I'd like to do is bring Nigel in. Could we, Nick, if you can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to bring Nigel in, and the key thing here is, with our next slide, is so if we're moving towards the future, how do we actually, as human beings, how do we bring tomorrow into today? So if you think of the CEO of Amazon, he's always thinking about tomorrow. What can he do today to bring that tomorrow closer to him? But Nigel, let's get your inputs on this.
Yeah, so our talk today, Veronica and I are really going to share, we're starting from a position of optimism and wanting to literally help you all think about what can you be thinking and being and doing today, doing more or less of today, to help you with the coming changes, to be as proactive as possible. So if we go to the next slide, please, Nick. Thanks. For those of you in the audience who may speak Putonghua, Chinese, you may recognize those two Chinese symbols, Hui Ji, which stand for crisis in Chinese. And some of you may have heard this before. The simplistic definitions of both characters are danger and opportunity. And it's almost too good to be true to think that the actual word has within it the word opportunity. So for some of you, COVID-19 is a crisis. I think for the world, we admit it's a crisis. And today's talk is to go a little bit beyond that, to say, well, it would seem that for others, there may be another crisis coming of the technological shift speaking up. So whether it's two crises in your mind or one, we'd like you to think about it as an opportunity. And we'd like to start today's talk by asking you to consider two important questions to help you refocus yourself today for tomorrow. The first question is about you now. How satisfied are you today in terms of being equipped for your future? Being equipped for your future in terms of coming out of COVID-19, whether you're a leader running a business or in a key role in an organization. And it moves from things like, are your values working for you? Is your organigram working for you? Are you working smart? And that's a question when Veronica and I coaching people will often probe and explore. And please get hold of these slides. And both of these questions are questions which we would encourage you to explore with your teams and organizations and even communities, and not just once, but continually. And complementing this is a second question, which is looking to the future. and is asking, how inspired are you with where you're heading? And equally, how inspired are you with where your team or organization or community is heading, given the situation we're in now with COVID-19 and going to come out of it, and how our businesses and the economy is going to adapt, which is really talking about your purpose and your vision. Veronica, anything to add from this screen and that's coming to you?
Yeah, I think moods are very contagious. Just in question number 2, whether it's within your family, with your friends, with your team, with your organization, if you're a leader, moods are really, really, really powerful. They're very contagious. You know what it's like if you're in a room with a grumpy person. You know, it really is not very comfortable, or an angry person, or a depressed person. And I think the key thing is, if you are a leader, and I'm talking about everyone as a leader, you know, a mother or a father is a leader, you know, so if you're interacting, we're all leading each other's and we're leading ourselves. It's really important that we choose how we want to feel. And if we are not inspired, guess what? We're not going to inspire anyone around us. So it's really important when you are setting your goals, like the compass there, the setting your direction, not that you've got some wish list at the end of it, but it excites you. And if something doesn't excite you or energize you or enthuse you, it's not going to energize, enthuse your team either. So it's really looking at yourself, first of all. So that's why we ask, how satisfied are you today in terms of being equipped for your future? How inspired are you with where you're heading? Because it starts with the individual. It's really important, Nigel.
Thank you, Veronica. And do please in the chat share any thoughts. And Paul's sort of watching the chat room, and we'll bring out things very soon and share things. But I'd like to give one example. So unnamed organizations, a very large garment manufacturer in Bangladesh, and its large clients in the US and Europe, you know, the well-known clothing retail brands. When COVID-19 hit, the retail brands all canceled everything. Even if goods are in shipment, they tried to pull out of paying, unless, of course, the bank couldn't stop the payments. So I've got a Bangladesh family that owns a business, thinking about where do they want to head in the future? Do they still want to rely upon certain clients who've been supporting them? And I happen to know one of the key individuals in one of the retailers who's feeling very bad for how they've acted during this time. So it's rather like saying, to question 1, the global retailer isn't feeling satisfied how they acted. And the question number 2, the manufacturer in Bangladesh is not very inspired about where they're heading unless they change direction. And to add to that, the potential for more automation and AI, of course, coming along is going to affect both parties. So Veronica and I are seeing many examples where there's a dramatic shakeup happening now, and we all know life will not be the same afterwards. That we're seeing now with Philippine call centers, there's a push by one bank to rely less upon them, thinking, well, I won't be able to have my call center workers 2 meters apart and not socializing. Do I take some beta tests of AI, of computer voices speaking to customers, and roll it out faster? So
yeah, so let's try and transport ourselves maybe to Africa, Nigeria. Veronica, you've worked in Nigeria, right? What is it like to go to a office or a boardroom in Lagos at the same time as walk around the streets? And what's the difference in hope or inspiration or collaboration?
Wow, I mean, the difference is quite tragic, actually. And very, when you walk into I work with a number of leading banks that operate there, across global banks who are based there, as well as local Nigerian banks. And I must say the offices are very much the same as the offices that we have in the modern world in the West. I think the key thing is that that's one thing. The technology isn't as great, but out on the street, and of course there you're thinking about, okay, as a bank, how am I going to expand and enhance my business with these 168 million people that live, you know, in our country, or however many it is in Lagos. And outside, it's pouring with people who are desperately poor and have no resources. So companies have to think about, okay, so where are we going to grow? How are we going to grow so that we can provide some of these people with microfinance so they can start their little businesses? And many Africans across the whole of Africa are incredibly entrepreneurial with the smallest amount of financing. And this is a fabulous opportunity for larger organizations. They don't just think about, okay, what's the latest credit card that we can offer people, or the latest loans or finance, etc. But how can we actually work down through the organizations as well? But it's very risky. I'll just give you one example, Paul. I had one of the MDs of the CEOs of a bank was telling me that an electricity provider, he already had an electricity provider, but someone came in from another electricity provider in Lagos and said, you know, I can sell you this electricity for, you know, much less than your provider you have. And he said, no, it's okay. I've got it. I don't need it. And he said, okay, but, you know, if you need any, here's my card. You know, I can provide you the electricity. So what happens is the guy goes outside the following week, his electricity goes. And guess what? The other second provider has cut it off. And of course, he's furious with his initial provider. So of course, the second provider comes in. So there's a lot of, you know, different sorts of challenges that are experienced, and desperation really to get some business.
Yeah, and something structural that's happening. One of our partners at Hip Investor is Open Invest. So if you go to Open Invest, which is a online financial advisor, it's mainly focused on advisors. It also serves individuals. They, at Open Invest, they have a team of coders in Africa. They've also brought them to the States and San Francisco to immerse, for the teams to immerse with each other. And you can see their profiles on the openinvest.co page. So you see a collaboration across Africa and America is there. And Open Invest is available in Australia as well, with some superannuation funds. So, so Nigel, how about you? How about your international experience in seeing hope or solutions in action? And do robots play a part in that at all?
Yeah, well, I'm based in Kuala Lumpur. I'm stuck in London at the moment, and I'd lived through the initial part of COVID, where I watched some organisations rushing to produce apps for interacting, and watching some very creative banks like CIMB in Asia and organizations in China trying to interact with their customers purely through AI. And there's even a coaching firm in China that's rolling out using a phone app to coach with a computer speaking to the person. I mean, it's career coaching. It doesn't go into psychology and things which Veronica and I spend a lot of time in with leaders, but it seems to be working. So I'm seeing in Asia, there's more happening and more experimenting with people, with a cashless society emerging in many Asian countries. And I'm told now it's totally cashless in Singapore, where I haven't been for a few months because of the lockdown, but it's turned cashless, which is a boon for the many apps which you can use to pay with, well beyond Apple and the banks. There's also these other providers as well that offer you vouchers and things. So a lot of exciting things happening. I also see companies being left behind and struggling, of course. Yeah.
Great. So what else can you tell us about the future of work, or how we can collaborate?
And Paul, I might just throw one question in on top of that off the Q&A, which is, there's a book we all know and love, I'm sure, Good to Great, about how good companies could become amazing companies back in about the 1980s. I'm not so clear how well that journey ended for many of them. But you know, if you think about the impact of automation and all of this future of work stuff, is this going to turn good companies into great companies again, or is it actually going to do exactly the opposite? I mean, that's a part of this question I think is really important.
Well, there's a large American group in the whole kind of engineering electronics space. It has dominated for many years in a few of its areas. It's beginning to really struggle now to smaller startups as many of the solutions are driven by AI and software with hardware added on, rather than hardware products are being designed with some firmware. And so it would seem, just as many of the good to great companies actually declined, and we've seen later interesting articles where the companies have been looked at 10 and 20 years later, there seems to be a strong trend for little companies chipping away at your bigger, well-known multinationals, which is perhaps a very new thing.
Nigel, do you want to talk about the digitalist mindset, integrity, etc.? Because I'm interested in a couple of those as well.
We'll talk together. So this is the simple model, and Veronica and I have got a couple of models we're sharing and tools we work with. And so we've already opened you up by saying, are you happy where you are and where you're going, given what is around the corner or what you're facing now? We wanted to share a few skills or tools that we feel are super, super important, because there's a sense of we're entering new territory. It may not be totally unknown to many of you, but because of COVID-19 alone, there's a newness. And so there's some skills which perhaps have gone rusty, you've never tried using. So the first one, if you look at this list, digitalist mindset. In very simple English, what we're saying is, how well do you and your teams and organization adapt to change? Have you got a natural resistance which holds people back? Is there a lack of trying to help people through the change? So the ideal is you've got this ideal mindset of embracing whatever changes are coming, whatever form of technology is driving. And the second one's about remaining ethical. We call it integrity maintenance. This sense of don't be tempted to cut corners. This year, I think Veronica and I were talking how we can't think of many organizations apart from perhaps supermarkets in the Western world who are hitting budget. I mean, we know Amazon are doing very well, some tech companies are doing very well, but I think you can confidently say the majority of companies this year are struggling to hit budget. Our advice is, don't let that tempt you into cutting corners, into being unethical. Sense making is just thinking better. It's just pausing to really brainstorm well. There was a Harvard Business Review article. It was the cover of the March edition last year, which said, question the question. And why are questions more important than the answers? Veronica, I'll hand over to you, and maybe you could pick on that, and then the values and learning, things we're heavily involved in. This sense of do you have the right values to take you forward, you and your team? Veronica, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yes, sorry, I got bounced out then. I didn't know where you got up to because I was delayed, but actually one thing I wanted to reflect on is values. That's right with you.
Yeah, please do, because I know you've got some interesting.
Pause thing. I don't know if.
Please share. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, in terms of values, I think our values before the coronavirus, in particular, well, one set of values around our work, our family, what our needs are, where we wanted to go on holiday, we were living our lives. So those, what we were going to deliver for work, what the targets were, what our goals were, what our ambitions are. And with lockdown, and not every country is in lockdown, it just shines a very different light on what our values are. And it's a time for us all to reflect as well around what's really important education for children if we're homeschooling, or what's really important about the roles that we want to have, or about our life. Do we really want to go back to commuting or into offices, taking us hours to get there every day? So I think the key thing is, during a crisis is a perfect time for us as individuals, and also within our families and also within our teams, is to think about what's important to us about, for example, work. What really values basically drive our motivation, which drive our behaviors. So what's really important to us about work? Why are we doing it? What really motivates the drivers? What's important about our relationships with people? You know, do we see people as human resources, that they are there to help us fulfill our performance targets and such like? What else is there? Do we want to actually have a bit more enjoyment with our relationships? Or what, you know, what are our values around community? The coronavirus has brought out in many people the importance of community and supporting the old lady next door who's all on her own and can't do her shopping, you know, or get her medicine from the chemist or something. So these are some of the things that will help us articulate the next stage of our journey, I think, and the team's journey as well. Do you want to carry on there, Nigel, with the unlearn?
That's good, and it links to the comment above on sense making. Just to pause and deeply reflect at this time, and thinking about values as your organization, as you embrace new technologies. How might this clash with your values if you can no longer keep the same sizes of teams? If there's a need to reorg and restructure, perhaps using the COVID-19, the whole recession that's coming, how will that clash with your values? And do you have values of wanting to embrace technology? So lots to think about, which links to the little term we put there of unlearning to learn. This idea of Alvin Toffler, the futurist, talking about the future will belong to those who are able to learn, unlearn, and relearn. It goes without saying, but I have to remind you all, and I know we know, but I don't know if we truly realize how much learning is truly available. LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Coursera, the MOOCs from many of our top universities and less well-known universities. And I don't see as much keenness. Perhaps we on this call, we are some of the keener humans, because in wanting to be part of these things.
And a quick note on that as well is
thank you.
One of the lessons that I've gathered now in my career is the hardest thing is for people to unlearn what they think they already know, or to be open to new experiences, new data, new evidence. So one of those unlearnings obviously is how impact and purpose is connected to profit, and that people are one of the main inputs into a company. Actually, you can't have a company, at least till all the robots take over, of a company without people. You need people to innovate, to invent. And when you have those diverse teams, those frequently can be more productive. So what either tactics or strategies should all of us consider to help, one, unlearn what we think we know, and what are there successful ways of doing that? And you have here, like, think about your impact, like how do we connect that? Because I think maybe on the next slide, you have a mix of like thinking and feeling and behavior. So what can we do, and how do we become contagious to others to do the same?
Okay, shall I go? I'll go through this one, Nigel. Okay, so this is a very simple model for very simple model, but very powerful model for putting you in control of behavior. Just do an example of this. I'm going to give you an example, and I'd like you to do one of your own for a moment. So every thought we have causes us to have a feeling. So we can think about a lovely thought. Oh gosh, I can't wait to be able to sort of fly out on that holiday that I booked for myself, and that gives one a positive feeling. Another thought might be, gosh, I can't wait to start my new job, and because of this, it's been delayed, but I'm really looking forward to that. Another one might be, on the opposite end, something around, oh God, I'm just going to go back to that terrible job again now. And that makes me feel really depressed or whatever. So every thought we have, oh God, I got to work for that terrible boss again. I have to go back to him again. God, I wish I could have a new job. So every thought we have creates a feeling, and that feeling creates a behavior. So let's just give you an example. Say, for example, I have a thought in my head about myself, and I might say to myself, I'm not very good at presentations. So if I actually have that thought about I'm not good at presentations, what do you think I'm going to be feeling inside just before I do a presentation? I'm going to feel nervous. I'm going to feel anxious. I'm going to be doing this sort of maybe breathe, my butterflies in my tummy. I'm going to get really stressed. My shoulders will be up around my ears. So I'm going to feel stressed. So guess what my behavior is when I step into that space where I'm presenting? I'm just going to start stuttering and making an absolute fool of myself because I'm not going to be in the best state possible. So just thinking about this very simple thought, feeling, behavior. So what's the thought that would make me, okay, that would get me to how I want to be? And the thought isn't, oh, I'm wonderful at making presentations, because that may not be true. So what's the thought that we want to think is, what state do I want to have that will cause me to do well? What I mean
Veronica, a quick question on this. We live in interesting times where some people lead by feeling rather than thinking.
Yeah.
So can you start with feeling and then thinking follows from feeling? Like, are these is this a one-way model, or can the model?
No, it's not. No, it's not. I mean, a lot of people, very good question. A lot of people feel something first and then behave. And the key thing is when you get the trigger of the physical feeling, and it's an unhelpful feeling, that's when it's really important to just pause, put your foot on the brake and go, hold on a minute. And the feeling is caused by a thought. So that's why we want to get back into what's the thought that's causing the feeling, okay?
And isn't there something around time? Nigel, let me get a slide up for you that maybe you want to talk to. Nick, if you can advance 2 slides with the 2 pie charts. Yeah, one and then one more. Yeah, this balance between the future and today. Nigel, you wrote bring the future into today. Tomorrow starts today. What experience have you found?
This is Nigel L you're talking to here, or Nigel C?
Nigel L, Nigel Lake.
Yeah, so I was smiling before because I'm someone who, anyone knows me, I spend a lot of time thinking, and I try to remember to warn people that if I'm frowning, it means I'm thinking rather than any way dissatisfied with what we're talking about. And I think that, we're in an environment today which is immensely stressful for many people. And I think it's incredibly important just to acknowledge that, we are, or many of us are, stressed. That's an entirely normal and reasonable reaction to the environment we're in. And there's only so much you can control about this. Where I was going to go, and I think Paul's question is a great one, is, so, we are at this point in time through a whole series of accidents we have no control over. But what we do have control over is where we're trying to go, where are we trying to end up? And the idea behind my book, The Long Term Starts Tomorrow, was that successful businesses, success in many ways is driven by absolute clarity as to where you're trying to end up, and then figuring out what are the practical things you can do along the way to get there. The chart on the left is a chart which captures typically what happens in a lot of boardrooms, which is 95% of the time is spent talking about business as usual, day-to-day, compliance-related matters. And if you're lucky, 5% of the time at 1:45 at the end of a long, tiring morning is spent on the future. A great solution for boards is actually to reverse that and try to spend a good chunk of time up front on the longer term and the tactical steps you're taking now to get there, because the game is you've somehow got to shift the outcome to what's on the right-hand side, which is much more focused on the future and on growth. And we've seen this play out in lots of ways with the companies that have been successful. A year ago, hardly anybody did meetings by video, despite the fact this technology has been perfectly functional for more than a decade. Suddenly, out of the crisis, we are doing this. And the point in all this is it's a wonderful environment to try new things and to start shifting towards the future, because it's, everyone's disrupted.
And it's true. Can I step in here and to add that because of the crisis at the moment, we're being forced to focus on the future. So it's actually going to cause an avalanche of us exploring and looking at future growth, which I don't think has happened. I don't think it'll ever happen again. It's a unique moment.
Yeah, and it's terrifying because of the path to robotization probably being accelerated 3 to 5 years. But it's hugely exciting because if you are prepared to step up and look for opportunity, whether this is changing your business model. Now, we talked a bit earlier about, well, companies are discovering that maybe they can do quite well using less resources than they're using today. That, you know, will result in lower numbers of jobs in some areas, but it creates new opportunity.
All right, so let's use some of our time to talk about what that future of work is. And I think the next slide helps lead into it. All right, so we talk about artificial intelligence, and last week during Earth Week, one of our panelists, Dr. Kathy, talked about indigenous people using artificial intelligence on Microsoft, phones that run Microsoft. So robots, friend or foe? Will they help us or hurt us? Will they be our overlords? How do we work in the future in a collaborative way? And does that collaborative way include robots and AI?
Shall I step in first and Veronica join me? I actually think that history has shown us. I remember studying in some detail how in England the weavers, the women particularly who would make the carpets and the cloth by hand, when the weaving machines came in, there were riots. But actually, what happened was, the weaving machines gave the weavers the opportunity to become the designers, to actually be elevated and to work with the weaving machines. And I think that's a common trend. And I see in our field of leadership training, we're moving more online, more virtual. So rather than we give trainings to leaders for a day, I think we'll be giving them reflections and advice after they've been through artificial intelligence, which has been sharing with them whatever it might be, how to strategize. So I see us being elevated as humans, but I think we have to also be human and empathic to those who are truly, truly impacted. Veronica, any thoughts from you, from your perspectives?
Well, I mean, you know, the data is that, you know, 40% of tasks today are already completed by robots. You know, we already have many of these. They're doing lots of the grunt jobs, you know, the apps, the computers, the purchasing online, the booking flights, the holidays, you know, data that we're wanting to pull in. So it's already, you know, robotization, if you want to call it that, is already within our lives. And I think if we can delegate to them the grunge jobs that none of us like doing, won't that be fantastic? And I think the key thing for us is our need to build our own resilience and to need to retrain, to upskill, to do something different, because our ability to change and develop is very much in line with our survival and our relevance in the new world.
So can robots be used to coach people?
It's a very good question.
Well, I mean, at a really simple level, there's heaps of places where they can be useful for teaching people. There's lots of things in learning languages, learning math, simple things like that, where a lot of the drudgery is being automated. And this is partly the point of this slide, which is done in the right way. All the clerical, administrative, routine, boring tasks can be automated. And what's left is caring, creative, cultural things. Potentially those jobs are more rewarding, more interesting to do as well. Sorry, Nigel, you were about to comment.
No, I can build on what you said with a really quick example, because I know that time is flying. British Airways today have publicly announced their plans to lay off 30 to 40% of their workforce, 12,000 of their workforce. I know how obsessed they are about customer service. So I've no doubt that they would be trying now to make do with less people by having even better AI voices speaking to us as the customers as much as possible, to leave the remaining workforce, to take the words of this slide, to be much more service-led than they already are.
And I think now this is where the dark side of this is, which is in historic revolutions, new jobs did come along to replace the old jobs. They came along slowly. There was very little real wage growth. And what's going on is an interplay between productivity gains, brackets, which means fewer jobs, and population growth and economic growth and higher spending offsetting that. And over time, things have got marginally better for most people slowly. But with what happens now, will there be jobs to replace the old jobs? The simple answer is yes, because there have to be, because people have to eat. But are those jobs going to be well enough paid is another question. And economists don't have an answer to this very dynamic problem yet. There is some work being done by a guy called Jorgen Randers in Norway and a colleague in Switzerland, which will create a dynamic model that we hope will answer this question. We have our fingers crossed and our bated breath to know whether what that tells us. But there is it's just massively important for us all to act. And the guiding light for everyone is, if you're taking cost out of your business using robotization, how can you use this as an opportunity to put more service in? If you don't, you're on a race to the bottom, and economically that's not going to work out very well because you will be totally marginalized.
Yeah, and this balance applies to people as well as robots. So many of us have heard CEOs say people are our most important asset, but people are not an asset on the financial statements. They're actually typically a cost on the income statements, not an asset. So we're going to talk more about that. Yes, exactly. So we're going to talk more about that next week on ESGX with Dr. Alex Edmunds. So as we wrap up here, Veronica, Nigel L, Nigel C, there's never enough time to dig into this. So what, I think we want to take a poll before, and then maybe we can react to that poll and wrap up. Nick, can you launch the poll? So get ready, everybody. There's a second poll coming up. And should be on your screen in a moment. So compared to the beginning of when we started this conversation less than an hour ago, are you feeling more optimistic, the same, or more pessimistic? As we've talked about crisis and creativity and collaboration and what tools we have and what mindsets we have. And we're going to talk in a minute about what books can help. All right, so compared to the beginning of this webinar, are you feeling more optimistic, the same, or more pessimistic? Nick, feel free to as the Secretary of State, finish the election and we'll repost the results. All right, so slightly more than half feel the same, but a third of the people who feel more optimistic, and at least one of us feels more pessimistic. So, so 60% the same, 35% more optimistic. I think that's a positive result of this conversation, and one more pessimistic. So, Veronica, what do you think about how to be optimistic or pessimistic, and parting words as we wrap up?
Well, I think there's one thing, it's a quote that I really like, which is always go through life as if you have something new to learn, and you will. And if you're always seeking opportunities to learn and grow, I think that usually is a really good, hopeful recipe for learning, growing, developing, and being more positive, and creating the future that you want to have that inspires you. My parting words.
And building on Veronica's words, I think yes, embrace the future, embrace learning, but at the same time, recognize how you're feeling and thinking, and talk to people, colleagues, a coach, about perhaps you're feeling worried and concerned, and try and talk it through and try and come to that more positive place of you wanting to embrace the future and study more, perhaps think of totally changing how you earn money, how you create value. This is your opportunity. This crisis is a chance maybe to get a job where you can work from home and not have to go to an office, for example.
Yeah, there's a great observation in here from Mahendra Shah in the Q&A, saying organizations need to think and act to secure the future. And this has to be beyond business goals of profitability. I think one of the messages from this and a series of our discussions over recent weeks and going ahead is, if you look at this the right way and also think long term, these goals end up being much more closely aligned than you think. So I think I'm agreeing with Mahendra, but there's not pain in pursuing this path. There's actually gain. Paul.
Agreed.
Yeah, and there's additional questions in the chat box about, are there factors hindering adoption of artificial intelligence? Are we waiting for computers to become more advanced? Are we waiting for more data? Are we waiting for more privacy? Are there any blockers? So if Veronica or Nigel, you want to speak to that before we wrap up, and then Nigel we'll turn to Nigel Lake for the good news segment.
Nigel, do you want to go and take this one?
Yeah, I mean, really, I see it being random how organizations are throwing themselves into opportunities, how certain banks are moving to take staff out of the customer service equation, you know. And I don't know whether actually the computers, whether technology was actually ready, but they're trying to create things. And I think it comes back from, I think Veronica and I were speaking about the CEO and board of directors, their interest in technology, their passion, what they brought back from Davos or from some other key meeting. And they sort of push their CIO or the CTO to say, look, let's do something in this area. Let's be the first bank in Vietnam or the first manufacturer to really interact with our customers in this creative way. So I see it being people-led, ironically, not technology-led.
And Veronica, you're talking about data and artificial intelligence, and maybe for strategists or consultants can use. How would that work?
As a consultant, I think the key thing is to have a sufficient amount of data. If you're a consultant to other organizations, you successful ones get some really good data on an organization, but you're using artificial intelligence and data all the time. And that's what I was referring to in that particular comment. I think that's part of the job.
Super. All right. Well, I want to thank Veronica Monroe and Nigel Cumberland for joining us today in this conversation about crisis and creativity and collaboration here on ESGX. And as we do every week on ESGX, Nigel Lake shares some good news of what's happening in the world. And we also have a bookshelf for you to check out. Nigel, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. And firstly, on the crisis point, I think the comments there about people driving innovation and change are incredibly important. One of the reasons I see through my work with boards of innovation not happening is the status quo gets in the way, day-to-day stuff gets in the way, and good ideas and plans to innovate, to improve the business somehow get delayed by a year or two. And so the first piece of good news for me, this crisis is a wonderful motivation to say we can't do that anymore. We've got to move forward much more quickly. Nick, if you can just flip forward a slide. The second thing is, we are all in this together. There's been lots of versions of that from artists and many other people around the world. Dealing with this sort of challenge is a collaborative thing, and these kind of discussions and the things that you can do through reaching out to people are suddenly, I think, easier to do in this environment than they were before. And then to what's here, there are lots of resources. There are a series of books here. Veronica's book, The Journey Inside, was published earlier this year. Nigel's next book, The 100 Things Successful Leaders Do, will be out in August, I believe. Paul Herman's book, Hip Investor, and my book, possibly Hiding Behind Your Windows on the right there, The Long Term Starts Tomorrow. There's links to all of these on the website. And beyond that, as we pointed out here, Nigel has a new program, I think, already available on LinkedIn or coming soon. We are about
LinkedIn Learning. I flew to California before the lockdown started in February to record 2 series of how can leaders be more successful and with the future that's coming.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we took a decision very recently. We are working through taking all of the learning program we've developed for our own business over the last 20 years, for which we've won a bunch of awards in Australia, and turning that into something which can be made available to everybody. It will end up covering about 8 broad subjects, 40 topics, a couple of hundred really bite-sized units designed to layer on top of all of the things that you've learned at business school and through your career, but perhaps you're thinking, maybe it doesn't quite work like I was taught, maybe there's something else. We're trying to make all of that accessible so that we can help people find practical ways to do the thing which is very important to me, which is understand that the long term is a wonderful guide to the short term. Paul, maybe back to you and a quick update on next week.
Will do. Next week, Dr. Alex Edmunds at London Business School will be our speaker, and he's a former Wharton professor, my alma mater. You may also have read his work if you track Great Places to Work. And what he showed was that the best places to work can be some of the best places to invest your own money in a portfolio. So we'll do that next week with Dr. Alex Edmunds on Tuesday, May 5th. And then throughout May, we'll be announcing the schedule later this week. So we'll have a full slate during May, including pandemic pivots, a new green jobs report, and sustainable food systems. So watch your email for reservations for that. And if we get it to work right, you can hit it once and register for all of them during May. I want to thank again Veronica Moreau, Nigel Cumberland, Nigel Lake, and Nick Gower for this session of ESGX. Please, please feel free to share this among your friends, community, coworkers, and leaders. And if you have suggestions for what topics you want to hear about or what speakers you think would be great to have an interactive conversation with, let us know. Thanks again for joining us on ESGX, the online global community for inspiration, education, and taking action. Hope you found lessons that you can learn today to bring into your life and to your work and to your community. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Fantastic. And if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button and share with your friends and subscribe to the channel too.
Have a great week, everybody.